The week my brother brazenly opened his mouth to demand $15 million from me, my mother calmly set the table with the exact set of fine china. The plates with the gold rim that I had swiped my own card to buy 11 years ago, she didn't remember that part at all. My mother carefully placed each plate down as if she were setting up a courtroom to judge who in this family truly deserved nice things. Brett, my brother, sat proudly at the head of the table, the position of power, as always. As for me, I got the rickety chair right by the drafty storm door, the door with the broken latch that rattled every time the wind blew. I sat there, quietly watching them. My name sat boldly on the deed of a house that my parents always bragged to the whole world they had bought for their precious son. For 11 years, nobody sitting at that dinner table knew, nobody remembered that the person actually keeping that house from collapsing for the past decade was the daughter shoved into the corner by the door. I will tell you about it. Stay with me. I am Georgia, 34 years old. I built a healthcare company from absolutely nothing, with exactly one first client and a beat-up used car. And this is the story of the Christmas night my family finally learned a harsh lesson. A lesson about the true cost of silence. The Sunday before Christmas, I drove down from Columbus, just like my routine for all the years since I left this house. An hour and 15 minutes of dull, gray highway, then turning onto my parents' street in Dayton. The same old wreath, the same cheap plastic reindeer stuck in the yard. Inside, the Starburst clock on the wall kept ticking. Loud, obnoxious ticking that filled the suffocating silences when people wanted to say something but held back. My mother, Carol, was pulling a clove-studded ham out of the oven. That rich, spicy smell hit my nose, awakening a weak, submissive version of my past self. Georgia, she called out, not bothering to turn around. Get the good china out of the cabinet and set the table. I opened the cabinet. There they were, the cream plates with the delicate gold rims. I remembered that store vividly. I remembered the feeling of handing my credit card to the cashier when I was just 23. Because my mother's card was acting up and Brett needed the good stuff for his housewarming party, I never got paid back. I never asked. Either I took the plates out, lining them up one by one, the gold rims catching the light, 6 settings, Brett's at the head. Mine, right by the drafty door. My father walked in, reeking of grease from the garage. As he slapped me on the shoulder, like I was a package that had been delivered on time. There she is, he said. Our busy one. That was my label in this house. The busy one. The capable one. The one who never needed anyone's help. I had paid for more things in this room than anyone sitting in it knew. And I was about to see firsthand exactly how much I was worth in their eyes, in a family. You learn the math of favoritism very early on. My family's math was incredibly simple. When Brett wanted to go back to school at 26, my parents paid his tuition twice because he slacked off the first time. When his apartment rent went up, they covered his rent for 2 straight years and called it a hard season. When his truck was repossessed, my father woke up at the crack of dawn, taking cash to the lot to buy it back so the neighbors would not laugh. I heard all these stories from them during the holidays. They told them with a tone of immense pride, as if they were the most heartwarming family tales on earth. And my own hard seasons, I faced them alone. At 18, I asked my mother to co-sign for a $400 deposit to rent a tiny studio apartment. She looked at me over her coffee cup and dropped a line I would hear hundreds of times later in various forms. Honey, we can only ever back one horse. That horse was Brett. It was always Brett. She believed in that like a religion, that the son carries the family's future and the daughter takes care of herself. So I took care of myself. I worked double shifts, burying my head in work from dawn till dusk. I paid that deposit with scattered tip money. And every Christmas, I drove back, sitting silently watching that horse get catered to a little bit more. I always told myself I did not care anymore. But that Sunday, while setting out the gold-rimmed plates I had bought, I realized I was just lying to myself. Then my mother smiled, a sweet, chilling smile. She asked how my little elder care business was doing lately. And I understood, just like how you can smell the damp earth before a storm, something was coming. She had never asked about it before. I just did not know yet what she had heard. At 18, I left this house with 2 bags of gear and a nursing assistant certificate I paid for myself. My job was bathing strangers, picking up fallen old men, and sitting next to someone at 3 a.m. when panic set in. My first real client was a 91-year-old woman named Patricia. She completely changed the trajectory of my life. Patricia had buried her own husband and outlived both of her biological children. She had no time to tolerate weakness, including mine. My first week on the job, I apologized for everything. Apologized for the traffic, for the weather, for accidentally standing in the way. Patricia set down her teacup and looked me dead in the eye. Stop that right now. She said, people treat you exactly at the price you put on yourself. You are handing yourself out for free. I never forgot that I started charging what my time was truly worth. I started learning to say no. Patricia became the closest thing to a real mother I had. It sounds weird to say that about a client, but family ultimately are the people who show up when you need them. I spent 8 years learning what my biological parents never taught me. That being needed by people does not mean you are loved by them. You can be the strongest person in the room, the pillar for everyone, but that does not mean you have to carry them your whole life. The problem was, I still had not learned how to let go, and that lesson, ironically, was about to be delivered by my own family. Everything started with a signature when I was 23. At that time, I had something my parents suddenly desperately needed: a clean credit history and a little savings. Brett had his eye on a house in Dayton. It had a maple tree in the yard. He craved it. But the problem was, Brett had been repossessed twice. His credit score was trash. and he had only been at his current job for exactly 6 weeks. Not a single bank dared to lend to him. So my parents drove all the way up to Columbus on a Saturday, bringing a folder and a flawless plan. We just need your name on this. My mother pushed the stack of papers across my kitchen table. It is just a formality. Your credit is good. This is how we protect our family. Then my father added the fatal blow. You are helping your brother build a future. He needs a lever, and you are already stable. I was 23. My biggest desire back then, foolishly, was to be acknowledged. I wanted to be a useful daughter instead of just someone assumed to take care of herself. So I signed. I did not sign as a guarantor the way you help a friend. They put me down as a co-borrower. My name sat proudly next to Brett's, like co-owners. I even dug into my own pockets for $4,000 of my savings to pay the down payment because their money got stuck at the last minute. They promised to take my name off in a year or two. Once Brett found his footing, and I believed them, that was the last time I paid the price for my naive trust. That signature and my name all stayed on that house for 11 years. The house that everyone in the family swore up and down the parents bought for their son. I need to make this clear because I know it sounds like I was terribly weak. I did not endure that loan for 11 years out of cowardice. I tried to get my name off more times than I can count. But here is the trap. When you are a co-borrower, you cannot just dust off your hands and walk away. The only way to remove your name is if the other person refinances the entire loan in their name alone. And to do that, Brett had to prove his financial capability. He never could. Every time I pushed, the bank gave the exact same answer: unstable income, trashed credit. The loan just sat there, permanently attached to both of our names. I was forced into a corner with no options. If Brett was late on a payment, it would not just drag him into the mud. It would destroy my credit score too. The very credit score I was draining myself to use to build my company. So every time he fell short, which was basically all the time, I quietly covered the gap. A few $100s here, $1,200 there. I wrote down every single penny in a notebook kept in my drawer, not to pull it out and demand payment later. But because a nurse's habit is to chart everything, you have to write down what you give away so you do not lose yourself. Brett had no idea. Neither did my parents. They were too busy bragging to the neighbors about buying a house for their son. Nobody knew the credit holding that house up belonged to the daughter. They constantly claimed did not need anything. The golden boy was living on the blood, sweat, and tears of his younger sister. He just could not see what the floor he was standing on was made of. While silently keeping Brett's house from foreclosure, I was also building my own empire, and absolutely no one in my family asked a single question about it. It started with Patricia, when the agency kept sending new caregivers who did not even remember her medication schedule. I started working extra hours off the clock to fill the gaps, at first under the table, then officially Other families in the building heard they needed someone stable, someone who treated their mothers like human beings, not bullet points on a task list. I hired 1 employee, then 3. I named the company Hearthstead Home Care. A hearth. I had spent my entire life warming other people's homes. I ran the company out of an old car with over 200,000 miles on it. With a folding table in my apartment, I taught myself payroll at midnight. I learned scheduling, billing codes, state licenses, all the brutal arithmetic of the business of caring for human lives. 8 years later, Hearthstead had 90 employees covering 3 counties. We were famous as a place that never abandoned a client. That reputation was our core asset. A massive healthcare corporation caught the scent. They wanted to buy it. I spent 4 months sitting in suffocating rooms full of lawyers, stubbornly holding on to a single condition. Not a single employee of mine would lose their job on closing day. Hearthstead was sold for $25 million. I sat in my car in the parking garage and called Patricia, not my mother. Patricia was the only person I wanted to share this with. "Oh, good job," she said. "And now, do not you ever let anyone make you feel small again." The deal closed in late September. 3 months before that Christmas night, I told almost no one. People usually think with a pile of money like that, you have to make a big scene so your family finally acknowledges you. I did not. I knew exactly what would happen when this family smelled money. I had seen it happen in other families far too many times. Money does not change a family's nature. It just turns up the volume. So I stayed quiet. I paid off the small mortgage on my own house in Columbus. Most of the rest I locked away untouched because I had learned a bitter lesson that the very first instinct of people who have never earned a dime themselves is to spend other people's money. I even did something incredibly cautious. I called the bank holding Brett's loan, asking again what I needed to do to get my name off. Same answer. Brett had to refinance, and Brett was still useless, so I ignored it. I continued my quiet life and told myself I would deal with this mess next year. I almost made it if it were not for Ashley. My sister-in-law had a habit of scrolling the internet in her free time, and she scrolled right past a local news article mentioning my company's name. Hearthstead Home Care acquired an 8-figure deal. My face was a tiny square in the corner of the article. She read it over twice. Then she did the thing that ignited everything. She picked up the phone and called my mother. The storm door of that entire year was blown wide open. I know exactly how those calls went because Ashley loves being the center of attention. She read the headline out loud to my mother over the phone. 8 figures. She dragged out the syllables slowly, like flipping tarot cards. The article guessed 25 million. My mother went silent. Then she asked Ashley to read it again. And here is what I realized the moment my phone started ringing off the hook. The family that had treated me like a ghost for 34 years suddenly cared about me very deeply. Tuesday, my mother called. Her voice is sweet as honey. "We hardly see you anymore. Come home early this year." Brett texted something he had never done. A wildly fake enthusiastic message. My father called to ask how my car was doing, a roundabout way of hinting at money. I observed all this circus with a bizarre calmness because I had predicted every single move. My job was planning for fall risks. Was it not? Looking at a staircase, I had to know exactly which step someone might slip on. Looking at my family, I saw clearly where everything was heading. The only thing was, I had not decided what I was going to do when that moment arrived. I had a house in my name, a notebook full of silently paid dollars, and an older brother who was about to discover the floor he was standing on actually belonged to me. That week, I started preparing. At first, I was not going to go. My gut told me not to, but Patricia was 91, and I had promised her I would never run away from rooms I had every right to sit in. So I went. The calls kept flooding in, morphing constantly. First, it was love. Then it shifted to complaining. By the second week of December, my mother dropped the mask of missing me. Your brother is having a hard time. She said, you know how much that house eats money. God, I knew better than her how much that house ate money. I had been pumping cash into it for 11 years. He is proud. He will not open his mouth to ask, she continued. But family helps each other, and you are in a position to help now. There it was, finally reaching the in a position part. He needs a little support to get through this, she said, with a tone that made it sound like a law of nature. You do not need that money, but your brother does. As if lack of money was the only currency that mattered, and my competence stripped me of the right to be cared for. I sat in my kitchen in Columbus at the exact same table where I had slumped over signing those papers at 23. I felt something old and exhausted inside me finally turn cold and incredibly clear. I did not argue. Arguing was the old role. The role where I always had to justify myself and ended up losing anyway. I just said I would think about it and hung up, and I did something I had never done in 34 years. I called a lawyer, not to sue them, but to clearly understand my position regarding the house I had been silently carrying since I was basically a kid. If they wanted to bring up who deserved what, I needed to know the hard facts on paper before I sat down at that dinner table. Aaron Webb was a real estate and family law attorney. He radiated the calm of someone who had watched blood relatives tear each other apart for 30 years. I laid my cards on the table. The co-borrower's signature, the down payment, 11 years of silent shortfall coverage. And the notebook, he listened in silence. Let me get this straight. He said, you are not a guarantor. You are a co-borrower. Your name is on the promissory note, and almost certainly on the title deed. That is not nothing. Miss Palmer, that is ownership. Let that sink in. I had spent 11 years of my youth viewing myself as Brett's safety net, a burden I was forced to carry. Aaron was telling me that on paper, I owned half of that house, So what can I do? I asked. He spread his hands. Many things. You could sue your brother to recover the money. You could file a petition to force the sale of the house to get your share back. You could make a lot of noise. That was the path this whole room was expecting. A lawsuit dragging Brett's rotting debts into the light and letting him drown in them. I sat and thought about it. It sounded truly satisfying. Aaron must have read my mind. He added gently, but the noise will only tie you to that house and to them for even longer. Think about what you actually want to walk away with. Before I left, Aaron painted a clearer picture for me. Aguarantur, he explained, owes the debt but owns nothing. They are just a name for the bank to chase. But a co-borrower is different. You carry the debt and you own a share. No one can cross your name off without your consent. The only clean way for you to get your name off is for your brother to refinance the loan, taking it entirely under his name. And to do that, he has to prove his capacity. Over the past 11 years, Aaron asked cautiously, has your brother's financial situation improved enough to take on that house alone? I almost laughed. Brett had refinanced, pulling cash out of that house 3 times that I knew of. Every single time, he chipped away at the equity that my hard-earned money was desperately protecting. His house was a wobbling tower of debt, with my name as the bottom brick. No, I replied. He cannot get a loan. He never could. Aaron nodded slowly. Then you have the upper hand. The question is not whether you can act, but how loud you want this play to be. Driving back that afternoon, I faced 2 crossroads. A loud path exposing Brett's true face in court, and another path, much quieter. That night, I pulled out all the records, every bank statement, every refinance history report. The original loan was modest. Then came the cash outs. 1 year to buy a boat, another year for a business venture. Even the tuition my parents thought they paid off was quietly rolled into the house debt. Every time they pushed the papers across the table, pointed to a blank line, and I just blindly signed, believing it was procedural. I had never read what I was signing. Tonight was the first time I read it. The house. My parents boasted to the heavens about buying outright for their son was actually drowning in debt. And the only reason it had not collapsed was thanks to the miserable daughter silently covering the shortfalls. I pulled out the notebook recording every dime I had shelled out over 11 years. And for the first time, I tallied it up, $71,420. That was the blood I had pumped into Brett's house to keep it standing. Page four, my name next to his. The next morning, I called Aaron, telling him to prepare the lawsuit. Word spreads fast. Ashley caught wind. I hired a lawyer. My mother called in a panic, screaming, asking if I was really going to drag my brother to court. I did not deny it. Let them sit there and imagine. But then I realized a lawsuit would force me to share a room with Brett's lawyer for a year. If I won, I would still be tied down. So I went to see Patricia. I told her everything. The company sale, the house, the signature, the lawyer, and the 71,000. She sat perfectly still, hands clasped. When I finished, she did not side with me. She just asked, Georgia, do you want to win? Or do you want to be free? I opened my mouth to say both. She raised a finger to stop me. They are not the same. She said, winning means you are still in the ring. Freedom means you step out of it entirely. Even your revenge is just a way to stay in that ring. You owe no one your spine. Do not fight over the house. Just let go. Let the house tell the truth. You have been too kind to hide. Something snapped inside me, done and definitive. Instead of putting all my effort into throwing the house in my family's face, I just needed to set it down. For 11 years, I was the pillar. The most devastating thing I could do right now was nothing. If I just stopped paying, the house would default on its own. Brett would be short on cash, like always. And this time, no secret check would fly in to save him. The house would have to be sold to pay the debt. Once the house was sold, my name would automatically be wiped clean. The revenge my family would never see coming was not an attack. It was an absence. I called Aaron and canceled the lawsuit. I requested 2 things. 1, I would stop covering Brett's shortfalls immediately. To fall, send a written notice to the lender that I would no longer carry the debt. The letter was sent 4 days before Christmas. The truth was fired from a quiet post office. The pillar was pulled. The house was already wobbling. Back to the Christmas dinner. Ashley put her fork down, looking at me with a chillingly bright smile. So, is the family not going to talk about Georgia's $25 million? The clock ticked in. The silence. My father stopped chewing. My mother's hand went to her collar. Brett looked at me like I had sprouted a second head. I calmly admitted it. My mother's reaction shifted from shock to calculation in just 4 seconds. She lunged forward to grab my hand, warm and clammy. Honey, that is wonderful. What a blessing for our family. And then she struck, your brother is suffering right now. You do not need that money, but your brother does. My father cleared his throat, rambling about keeping the money in the family. Brett, taking the cue, leaned in. I never want to beg, but things are tight with the house. If you pump a little in for me, $15 million. He asked for $15 million as if my 8 years of grinding 100 hours a week was a public gold mine. Ashley chimed in. After everything your parents did for you, how can you let your own brother lose his house? I almost applauded that sheer audacity. What my parents did for me, a rental deposit, they refused to co-sign. That was it. And what they took from me, piled up to the roof, 3 days before Christmas. The bank received my notice. In December, the mortgage payment fell short. This time, no money from Columbus arrived. The loan officially went into default. Brett got the delinquency notice. He frantically called my mother. In his head, I was the villain hoarding money and refusing to save him. He called me the night before Christmas Eve. Screaming through the phone, I waited for him to finish yelling, then said softly, Brett, refinance the loan and put the house in your name alone. Take my name off. Silence. I cannot. His voice shrank. The bank will not approve. I know. I said, you never could. That is why my name has been on it since you were 26. He froze. Your name is on my house. Our house, Brett. Badge vol, co-borrower. I paid $4,000 for the down payment. And I have covered your shortfalls for 11 years. Then why is it defaulting now? He whispered. Because I stopped. I replied, that is all. I am not paying anymore. And now, at the Christmas dinner table, Brett fell to his knees on my mother's linoleum floor, crying pathetically. Please, Georgia, do not let them take everything from me. My mother screamed, look at what you did to your brother. You stole his future. I sat there, strangely serene. I am only going to say one thing. I said calmly, that house, for 11 years, has had 2 names on the debt, Brett's and mine. I am a co-owner. I paid out of my own pocket, so this family could have a house for the precious son for 11 years. I covered $71,000 in losses. Nobody in this house knew. Last week, I stopped paying unless Brett can get a loan himself to keep it. The house will be sold. You are not being robbed of your future. Brett, you have been living off my future for 11 years. I am just not lending it to you anymore. My mother, trembling, tried to salvage her old mantra. Family money must return to the family. We could only ever back one horse. I smiled. You are right. The money is returning to the family, returning to me. And Mom, you backed the wrong horse for 34 years. You never bothered to see who was actually carrying this entire stable on her back. I stood up. The rickety chair scraped against the floor. The door latch rattled in the wind. The familiar sound that only I ever bothered to fix to block the cold for this house. Today, I was not fixing it anymore. I put my coat on. I do not hate anyone. Keep the house. If Brett can manage, do not call me about money anymore. I pushed the storm door open and stepped out. The wind rushed in. The broken latch clattered wildly. I did not look back. Finally, that door latch was someone else's problem. You want to know the ending. Brett could not get a loan. Obviously, a few months later, the bank foreclosed on the house. When the house was sold, my name was officially wiped clean. I was completely free. My parents sold their house and moved away. Ashley divorced Brett that very year. Now, Brett rents just like I did at 18. I took a portion of the money to set up a scholarship fund for nursing assistants. Named Patricia Vance, when she received the scholarship honor, she held my hand and laughed loudly, saying, "This is family money returning to its rightful place." To anyone who is the invisible safety net for their family, You have every right to pull that net back. You can be the strongest person, but you also have the right to put the burden down. Stop breaking your back for people who are just waiting to step on you. You deserve to be free.